Hello everyone, we are Cassandra and Elizabeth, and we're gonna talk about the epic poem novel Aurora Leigh, written by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was born on March 6, 1806, at Coxo Hall, Durham, England. She was an English poet of the Romantic movement. The oldest of 12 children, she was the first in her family born in England. Educated at home, Elizabeth had read passages from Paradise Lost and a number of Shakespearean plays, among other great works, before the age of 10. By her 12th year, she had written her first epic poem, which consisted of 4 books of rhyming couplets. Throughout her teenage years, Elizabeth taught herself Hebrew so that she could read the Old Testament, and her interests later turned to Greek studies.
Elizabeth developed a lung ailment that plagued her for the rest of her life. Doctors began treating her with morphine, which she would take until her death. While saddling a pony when she was 15, she also suffered a spinal injury. Despite her ailments, her education continued to flourish. Due to her weakening disposition, she was forced to spend a year at the Sea of Turkey, accompanied by her brother Edward, whom she referred as Bro. He drowned later that year while sailing at Turkey, and Elizabeth returned home emotionally broken, becoming an invalid and a recluse. She spent the next 5 years in her bedroom at her father's home. She continued writing, and in 1844 produced a collection entitled Simply Poems. This volume gained the attention of poet Robert Browning, who wrote her a letter. Elizabeth and Robert, who was 6 years her junior, exchanged 574 letters over the next 20 months, immortalized in 1930 in the play The Barretts of Wimpole Street by Rudolph Besser. The romance was bitterly opposed by her father, who did not want any of his children to marry. In 1846, the couple eloped and settled in Florence, Italy, where Elizabeth's health improved and she bore a son. Her father never spoke to her again. Finally, Elizabeth Barrett Browning died in Florence on June 29, 1861.
In 1857, Elizabeth published her first novel, Aurora Leigh. In her poetry, she addressed the oppression of the Italians by the Austrians, the child labor mines and mills of England, and slavery, among other social injustices. Elizabeth wrote Aurora Leigh at the height of her literary career, and the poem is deemed her masterwork in terms of poetics and narrative. Part autobiography and part social criticism, the poem traces the life of an English woman and poet, Aurora Leigh, and is frequently cited as a proto-feminist treatise of its portrayal of difficulties arising for female characters from traditional values and practices of English society. She tells of her birth in Italy, her early years in rural England, her successful literary career in London and later in Florence, and at the end, her marriage to her one true love. Browning's innovative use of genre, self-reference, and feminine perspective make Aurora Leigh a landmark of 19th century literature. From a commercial point of view, it proved to be by far the most successful of Barrett Browning's works. By 1885, 28 years after its first publication, it had gone through 19 editions.
First book. In first person, Aurora Leigh tells us that she's writing for her own uses and that she's still young. She begins with her mother. I write, my mother was Florentine. Her mother died when she was 4, and her father, a scholar and not as good as her mother at raising and loving a child, took her to live in the mountains. Her father learns to love, and his advice to her just before he dies is, love, my child, love, love. She then tells of being sent to England to live with her father's sister. who is strict and constraining. A wild bird, scarcely fledged, was brought to her cage. She received an English education for girls, which rather cramps her style. Aurora Leigh critiques the conduct books of the Victorian era. She is furthermore disappointed with the English natural landscape, less free than the nature that she is used to in Italy, a nature tamed and grown domestic like a barn door cow. Yet she maintains her resilience, catching moments of life from nature and from her own thoughts. She tells of how the world of books were rather dangerous for a child. The world of books is still the world I write. She eventually learns to love England as she discovers poetry, idolizing romantic poets like Keats who were young but old with respect to their soul.
As the focus of this video is on books 1 and 9, we're just gonna give a short summary of what happens from books 2 to 8. At the age of 20, her cousin, Leigh, asks her to be his wife for the only reason that he needs her to help him in his philanthropic activities, but she rejects him. Then, Aurora moves away from the rural community in which she lived to London, where she will be independent and strive for literary success. To help support herself, she writes articles for encyclopedias and journals, but she finds her main satisfaction in the publication of her volumes of poetry, which are reaching a wide and admiring public. In contrast to Aurora, there is a subplot in which the main figure is a victim of the abuses of society, Marian Earle. She is the only child of an ignorant and abusive migrant farm worker and a wife cowed into submission by his drunken rages. The girl runs away from her parents in fear of the violence, and she is rescued from destitution by Leigh. She even receives from him an offer of marriage. However, they don't get married, as Lady Voldemort, Aurora's aunt, takes Marian away to a brothel in Paris, where she is drugged and sexually assaulted. As a result of this act of violence, she becomes pregnant and after much ill treatment, gives birth to a son. After 9 years in London, Aurora decides to go back to Florence. On the way, she stops in Paris, where she encounters Marian and hears the story. She takes Marian and the baby to Florence with her.
Ninth book. Lady Voldemort proves that she is not as bad as Aurora has made her out to be. She handed over Marian to an old maid of hers, which she trusts, and did not know that she would fall into bad hands. Moreover, she genuinely did not think that Marian and Romy loved as she could have loved him. Voldemort says that she hates Aurora, and says that her letters is insolent and absurd. Romy offers marriage to Marian, and she at first accepts, but then on second thought says that she is dead and won't love another other than her child. Perhaps she never loved him. She misses only that he had wanted to be his slave. She exits the scene, and Aurora and Romy reconcile. Romy at first feels that he is unworthy of Aurora, but she further humbles herself, saying she is not a generous woman, and that she forgot that she was a woman who loved like the rest. He mistook the word, but I mistook my heart. So she judges her crime more seriously. In this poem, Barrett Browning has dealt with some of the major social problems of her age. The poem shows a woman with great energy and sense of purpose to live by herself in London and become renowned on the strength of her own unaided efforts. Professional success alone, however, is not sufficient, for nothing can give more meaning to a woman's life than enduring love in marriage. In mid-19th century, any woman who has born a child out of luck, even if she had been a victim of male aggression, was shunned by respectable people and condemned to a life of penance and mortification. Sexual activity outside of marriage was immoral, but she believed that society should be more compassionate in its treatment of women who had been victims of sexual violence. It is not surprising that the story of Marianne Earl shocked a number of women readers, some of whom were reported to have said that the reading of Aurora Leigh had endangered their morals.
Themes: Woman as an artist. Browning was committed to writing as a woman, so her main character in Aurora Leigh has the same intensity of purpose. The emphasis is on the right of a woman to work as an artist. Aurora rejects Romney's proposal because he sees her role as a partner in his work, with no room for a career of her own. So Browning makes sure that Romney fails in his socialist endeavors while Aurora succeeds as a writer and communicator. It is important to the message of the story that Aurora is successful as a poet. In Victorian times, Browning and other female writers complained about their gender prejudice evidenced by critics. They wanted to be judged as authors, not as women.
The proper subject matter of poetry. In the mid-18th century, literary debate often focused on the proper subject matter of poetry. Intrinsic to this debate was the relationship of poetry to current affairs. Browning came down decidedly on the side of those who believed that current affairs were appropriate to poetry. Aurora Leigh is her most notable effort that takes this position, since it discusses issues of importance to Victorian society, such as the woman question, problems of prostitution and poverty, and the value of socialist reform. Love or art. The moral to the story of Aurora Leigh is that without love, the rewards of fame and success are insufficient. The entire storyline is a journey for Aurora and Romy to this conclusion. Romy learns that he cannot save the world by himself. Further, he will do better in his work if he first gets his own life right and has love to support him. Aurora realized that she should have based her life on love and that she would have been even better poet because of it.
This is the list of the sources with the information provided in the video, in case you want to take a further look at them.
Well, that's all, and many thanks!